I'm John Paquette, VP Solutions for TIS's US market and also the host of our Coffee Talk series. Now, in today's session, we're going to be talking about what I think is a prevalent trend in the market, and that's sort of this mentality of the Treasury is making a shift from being an operational processing center to playing a more strategic role within the business. So we're going to discuss this from a few different angles. In general, do we think that this is the right way to think about Treasury as being more strategic than operational? Or, what's sort of our view about, Treasury's role within the organization? What's the proper place for them to really play? Some strategies to assess that position and maybe, kind of game plan in terms of how you can make that transition from operational to more strategic, and, whatever sort of else comes up in the natural conversation during the course of our session here today. So I think one thing's for certain is it's never been more important for Treasury to play a strategic role within the business. I mean, given the economic climate of 2023, supply chain disruptions, inflation, rising borrowing costs, there's definitely plenty of opportunity out there for Treasury to play a strategic role. So before we jump into our session today, definitely want to take a moment here to introduce our co-speakers, Katia Franz and Michael Bach, both from Deloitte. Maybe you guys could take a moment here to introduce yourselves as well, and we'll start with you, Katia.
Yeah, hi everybody, and thanks John for having us here. My name is Katia Franz. I work in the German practice of Deloitte in the Global Treasury Advisory Services as a senior manager. I have a background in banking, bank treasury, more or less, and also in treasury technology, as I worked in professional services at a treasury management system vendor before I joined Deloitte. And yeah, I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Yes, definitely taking over the baton here. So that's perfect. Thank you. My name is Michael Bach. I'm also a senior manager with the Deloitte practice in Germany, looking at their global treasury advisor services. What we say on the treasury technology advisory. So also looking on an investment banking background combined with the expertise having been responsible for the professional services of a treasury management system vendor. So that's, let's say, taking it over to Deloitte in the view on a focus with the treasury technology and the overall end-to-end consultancy when it comes to the process designs. So I'm happy to be here today with you, John.
All right, thanks very much, guys. Yeah, maybe as a sort of an introductory point here, we validate this sort of concept a little bit in terms of, is Treasury actually becoming more strategic within the organization? Do you think that's the right term to use for Treasury? And is that what you guys are seeing a lot in your client engagements? Is that Treasury is really bolstering up their strategic position within their company? So, Michael, maybe we go to you for the first word on this particular topic.
Yes, for the first part, definitely a clear yes from my perspective. So from a personal perspective, and what we encourage the Treasury teams to take that position, but also going back to what you asked, what do we see in our engagements, what we see in the projects, and I think it's a bit apart. Let's say take a look at 4 columns more or less, building a bit the foundation of that shift. So what we see in most of the Treasury projects these days, that we have an interesting combination. Let's say combining the challenging of the status quo on processes and at the same time looking at technology opportunities to build more robust, less error prone, and definitely more reliable and automated processes. So that's really kicking in that topic, allowing more time to, well, let's say, look at value creation services or value creation tasks, get the repetitive part out. And another part is definitely a bit either Treasury takes the lead, or or Treasury is forced at some part. What I call a bit looking about the played edge in terms of simply saying, okay, well, what's around in the corporate? That's an internal, external part. Really looking at collaboration where Treasury could add really or help or step in terms of really shaping future-proof processes. So that's a bit apart. Looking about the played edge in that case. And the other 2 topics, what we often see, it's a bit driven there by management reporting or benchmarking possibilities now these days, because you're getting more transparent. Can be a good thing, can be a bad thing, but the part is definitely you're able to look at a benchmarking to compare yourself from a Treasury perspective to other teams. So that's really enabling and fostering the part saying, okay, well, I would like to take a look on a leading or best practice approach, and where do I need to evolve to also move into that space to be more the strategic driver in the company. And finally, definitely there's a part, you all know, looking at the ERP space, a lot of transformation projects going on, and we still see Treasury sometimes behind that wave, more or less. And what we see is that also as Treasury is picking up and getting the confidence and saying, okay, well, no, we need to be on the table and participate in that part, also make our contribution to the wider process in that case. And So I think these four topics are really a good foundation, demonstrating what we see in the projects, and demonstrating that move to a more strategic approach. And also looking a bit to Katja on her experience in the project side.
All fine. Actually, I think you mentioned everything, but just perhaps looking at it from another angle. We also see it in staffing needs, I think, if reflected in the market, right? If we look at job descriptions for the job postings that we have, we see what is being asked of Treasury people. We see it, trend towards more strategic things, to more tech-prone profiles. So there is a lot of change going on also there, and it's reflected in the market. And also, I mean, we are speaking for the DACH region mainly, of course. I just saw a statistic on job postings. So number of job postings in the DACH region was quite stable for nearly 10 years. And then in 2019, it started to increase. And from 2020 to 2021, suddenly the number of job postings in a year doubled. And the level is still increasing. So we see there is a demand for Treasury staff. The job profiles become more known, right? So there is definitely more focus on Treasury these days.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. I mean, it is amazing to see the sort of the transition and the responsibilities that Treasury is expected to have these days, and the skill set they're expected to bring to the table too. You see a lot of new roles coming out around, Treasury technology experts, or even financial transformation type roles and things like that in the market. So you can clearly see that this is on companies' minds to figure out how to continue to evolve these processes and have Treasury play a more strategic role. It's interesting too, because I always try to draw the delineation between, important, like, is Treasury important? They're a function we can't do without. They're a really valuable supplier of information to other business units within the organization, right? Or are they strategic? And I think a strategic is like, they're playing a role in helping the business to look ahead, to navigate uncertainty, to kind of see into the future a little bit and kind of plan for that future. I think it's the latter. I think they are becoming more strategic in a lot of different categories, which we'll get into, I think as we progress through the next couple sort of discussion points here. But yeah, I just wanted to kind of, bring that up, that context for the conversation. But, if we were to think about Treasury becoming more strategic, I guess, how are they making this shift? And maybe from the standpoint of like, how are they finding time to engage in more strategic activities? They haven't necessarily, given up any of their responsibilities. These operational tasks that Treasury was historically responsible for, they haven't dropped off. They're still there. All those processes are still in place. So maybe, Katja, I could go to you in terms of, I guess, how are they managing that sort of the difference in workload and finding time for these strategic activities?
Actually, what we've seen in the market in the last years is, I mean, the system coverage in Treasury organizations has increased. It's getting better. And the capabilities of the systems have increased really great. Yeah. So Treasury management systems and payments systems and all the other niche systems, special systems in your technology landscape, they all have developed and are developing all the time, and they constantly enable you to improve and reduce effort that is needed for consolidation of numbers, compiling Excel files or whatever. And of course that gives more time, but also the system coverage, it does not only give you more time, it also can highlight things where you had blind spots before. Eventually you suddenly see things that you wouldn't have seen in your Excel tables, because you don't see the data all the time, and you suddenly see how important it is to really look into what is sales doing, what is what is accounting doing, what is happening in the organization, why are we paying intercompany payments back and forth between bank accounts, what are we doing in the organization. All that visibility that comes with system coverage helps to find ideas where you can improve, basically. I think the Treasury space or the Treasury community, they're actually very known for always wanting to improve their function, and are sort of a bit techy, right? So they like their technologies, they like to improve, they like to introduce new things and look into new opportunities. And I think that combination that gives them more time, and also more the need to be quicker in reacting sometimes drives those initiatives. So it's
the part is definitely a bit when I mentioned that looking at the blade edge, that's also part here in really what Treasury is doing in moving more strategic. What is driving the shift and getting prepared is really the part that we see a lot of things taking really responsibilities, not necessarily driving them, because that's maybe a part where we wouldn't call it the typical Treasury playground or the typical Treasury home turf, but we see definitely things looking at supply chain financing, the whole supply chain part, the working capital pieces and so on. Normally it's said, is it really, let's say, at the heart of the Treasury? Sometimes not really, but the part is definitely, there's a high dependency. So, Treasury can benefit, can add their value, bring their expertise to the table and help the other teams to grow in that part also. And in the end, Treasury is benefiting from that overall part, because you have, let's say, as Katja said, you're looking at systems, you have an increased, let's say, data quality, you're able to decide in a shorter time on a better database quality. So that's a bit the part where I think it's getting away from a pure collecting part, really moving forward to get that aiding the overall business more for a strategic approach.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Katja, some of the points you brought up about tech investments, it almost seems like that's, I don't want to call it a prerequisite, but, just getting some of those more operational tasks automated, that definitely frees up the time for Treasury to be able to then focus on the strategic activities. But I like the way you phrased it, in that they don't have to necessarily attack one and then the other. It's once you put that technology in place and you start getting that visibility into your cash flows or, your processes, yeah, like that, you can already start to act more strategically and start to plan for that next investment. So
some operational tasks actually come along with the technology, right? So like we see system admins being typically in Treasury department for the Treasury management system, right? They're not in IT usually. So some operational tasks come on top of normal work at the Treasury, but yeah, in general, I think the systems help to improve and find new fields of improvement all the time. Yeah, so.
Yeah, no, agreed. Yeah, I think treasurers themselves are always looking for efficiency in terms of, how do we have the most efficient cash management structure? How we, you sort of structuring our processes and things like that to be the most efficient for our people, so they're not super time consuming on a day-to-day basis. I mean, how often do you hear, we're going through a bank rationalization or something like that, a basic, non-tech investment type initiative aimed at simplifying that stream for Treasury, so that they can, sort of free up some of those operational type hours that are spent. But nevertheless, even despite I guess everything that's out there in terms of this trend from going from operational to strategic, it definitely seems like companies are in different spots, right? If you talk to one Treasury department versus another, they're sort of in a different spot in this journey from going from purely operational center to strategic. Some might be in the middle, some might be on the far right, have really sort of taken on a strategic role within the business. And so I'm just curious, in your engagements and things and just your general experience, what do you think is driving some of this sort of difference in organizations making this shift? And Michael, maybe I can go to you for the first comments on this one.
When you look at what we most often hear as a first part, is really a part, let's say, or it needs to be the company's size driving it, or the business needs. Are you more centralized? Let's say we focus on let's take the DACH region, or look at a global corporate. Is that driving it? I think it's not so the word about really the size of the company size, the size of the business, because you can run, and that's a bit part, if you bring in technology, you can run a larger business with a reduced treasury team, because then they can rely on the technology there. So it's a thing. Sometimes, yes, if you look at smaller corporates, definitely you have the 1-2 treasury guys, let's say, doing that whole stuff, and they need to be the all-rounder from many things and so on. Maybe that's a bit sometimes the advantage by growing in company size and being able to really have, let's say, more team members, and you can already have a bit of a specialization. That's a bit also going back what Katja said in the beginning on the staffing parts. You can have maybe, if you're looking at 3-4 people, more the tech geek there already in, who is more familiar with the technology. If you look at the origination, if, let's say, maybe the evolution out of accounting and so on, more on the broader finance part, and then you founded the treasury team. It's a bit the part, that's really the all-rounder part. So I think it's not company size, it's more really about the maturity where you are on that whole digitalization journey. I think that's really a great way you can look at where are you? Are you still with the paper-based processes, which is not, let's say, negative by per se, but the part is simply you need to start somewhere. And I think that's a great where you can really see where to start with and where are you on that journey. So I think it's really a bit when it comes to maturity of the broader finance or the treasury team in that case. So I think that's really a very good anchor point. And definitely it's sometimes easier to start something from greenfield. Definitely, if you're starting something from scratch again, that's easier, and you can, let's say, way faster up to speed than, let's say, looking at an existing environment where you need to consider all the connectivities to all the other departments and say, okay, well, yeah, well, I need to align that one, I need to align that one. So that's a bit the part. Definitely, what we also think, what we see in the projects, it's greenfield is easier. It's challenging. Definitely, you need to let's say, create all the processes from scratch. But in sometimes some parts by selecting technology, it's easier. And the other part is where you also see that, which is sometimes a bit more challenging, and saying, okay, well, grow something out of an existing environment. So that's a bit the part on the maturity of the corporate or the business itself. And there's one important thing, what we ever have is the part is, yes, you definitely need the backing of the CFO. You need the backing, especially if you go there, if you go more in the global part with the decentralized teams and all the parts. If you go that route, definitely it would good to have him as a game changer, as an enabler on board. Otherwise, it works, but it might take three, four times the time you normally would need for that one. So that's a bit the part. And as said in the beginning, not the company size so as an anchor point, but these other parts. And I know that, Katja, you have a point there where I definitely think it's also viable to take a different look also on that overall topic.
Yeah, basically a bit stressing what you just said about company size not being really that important. I mean, everybody, it's a good key to cluster your customers, right? You need like, is someone mid-market or enterprise customer? All the vendors do that. We do that when we look at our customers. But what's really driving the effort in Treasury is the complexity of the organization. Are you involved in many countries? Do you deal with many currencies? What is your strategy? Is it a stable group structure with like a constant number of entities, or are you acquiring new companies all the time? Are you selling companies or parts of the business regularly? Are there a lot of different ERP systems that you need to tackle? So that all drives the complexity and it influences what type of technology you need and what level of support you need from technology and which system you can use for that, and how robust your processes must be and how you're organized within Treasury. And I know I've had some really bigger customers with actually quite simple setups, not so complex. And in system selection projects or in implementation projects, they would come to me and say, I don't even want to tell you what you won't believe us, but we still do this and that in this system with that simple process. In the end, the finding was it's actually good the way it is, because simplicity helps in having a robust process. It doesn't need to be complicated just for the sake of having like the best technology. Or the best setup, market leading setup. If your structure is quite simple, then some of the processes can be quite simple. And sometimes you just don't value it as a customer because you don't know that actually it's fine. You always, you go to webinars and you hear success stories of other customers and you think like, I'm really lagging behind here. Yeah. So, but it might not be true. It might be true in things that you don't even see, but it might not be true as well. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd agree with you guys completely. I think you hit maybe like every point I was thinking about making as well, particularly about company size, not necessarily being the ultimate factor there. Yes, it's probably easy to sort of generalize and think that a larger company has more variables to manage. Maybe that gives you, more ability to be strategic, but we've seen some mid-market companies, even small companies with some really complex variables to manage. And I think it's much more of the nature of the business and what they have to deal with from a treasury perspective that's maybe driving that. Another factor is, I guess larger companies might be further along on the tech adoption spectrum, just because, I remember my early days of Treasury, it was, the TMSs were these big things that were the massive implementation projects on premise, and they were kind of viewed as being reserved for just the biggest and most complex organizations out there. Like you commonly heard, we're not big enough for a TMS. Like that was a common sort of slogan amongst the mid-market small organizations. They just felt they didn't need it. And maybe that gave the large organizations more opportunity to, put in place these automations and things like that, like we talked about in the last point, fuel future, ability to take on strategic initiatives. But once again, I think that's a generalization a little bit too. I don't think necessarily that's true. And as we pointed out, I think you can kind of tackle both at the same time, even if you're not fully, didn't get fully automated 10 years ago. It's a more recent thing. You can actually address the automation and the move to strategic all at the same time. So I don't think that's a factor either. And I think also for small companies, and I think, Michael, you kind of alluded to this point a little bit too, is that Treasury is kind of starting to position itself more in the middle of the whole cash conversion cycle and really understanding how cash is moving in and out of the business, working capital, how they can influence that for the benefit of their business. I think you've seen a lot of small Treasury departments being built with responsibilities for even maybe overseeing AP and AR and, like really having more of a prominent role within the business. So it could be that the small companies in some cases are more positioned to act more strategically within the business. So yeah, I mean, it's a lot, but the one point I definitely agree with is the backing of the CFO. If it's the mandate of the CFO for the Treasury department to be more strategic and he's putting a prominent place on that department, that's going to help a lot, obviously, in that transition as well. So, but yeah, maybe moving forward into like sort of more practical day-to-day examples you guys have saw in your engagements with clients. Katia, maybe could you give us a few examples in terms of, some areas where you've seen Treasury actually act more strategically within, particular client situations?
Yeah, perhaps taking a step back again, especially in the DACH region or the German-speaking region of DACH, actually, we don't even have a German word for the department. It's called Treasury, right? So when I started in that field and I was asked, where are you working? What are you doing? And I said, well, I'm a Treasury consultant. Then everybody was like, yeah, but what is Treasury? Even when they had a finance background, because Treasury typically in Germany or around Germany, it's not really included in all business degrees. Like it's not known what we're actually doing, what we're tackling, what the field is. So I guess that sort of, when that started, or the job profile came up here, then the treasurer was a data collector, collecting account balances from multiple entities and then doing a weekly cash report, right? And then with simple initiatives, introducing a central either e-banking system or proper payments, bank connectivity system, small TMS, the visibility increased and the role became more strategic because you suddenly could see your cash balances at a glance. It doesn't sound like a very recent development, but we still see that with customers, that they are still there, depending on which countries they're in. It can take a while to get really full cash visibility. And then all the payment processes. Typically you start with, you want cash visibility, and then you see, oh, I actually can do my treasury payments now that I've connected the bank anyhow. And then you think, oh, what about all the operational payments? I could ask the accounting department and check what their process is and if we can integrate it. And then you see, oh, the process that they're doing is not really safe. We should really try to centralize that as well and bring that into a robust framework. And with that, I think it's sort of a spiral. Actually, you get the visibility because as a treasurer, because you're involved in all these projects and these initiatives, and then people suddenly recognize, oh, there's someone I can talk to if I have an issue with banking partners, if I'm not sure if I needed financing, if there is someone who knows what they're doing, and I can actually ask at Treasury for advice. And with that, the visibility becomes more and more and more. And then in the end, you start tackling projects like I mentioned it briefly before. You notice that the payment streams across the globe within the company are massive, and you start thinking about, can we do like a netting thing, or perhaps an in-house bank, or we somehow need to tackle all this bank-to-bank payments, which are actually within our organization. Everybody, like all the banks, are happy because they're earning money, but it's not efficient what we're doing, because we just move cash around all the time. And that visibility, accounting people knowing, oh, I can actually talk to them, and we try to figure out something together, that really helps. And then it's a spiral. You become more and more strategic. The CFO knows that he can talk to you if there is an issue that involves the broader finance organization as well, and not just like cash management, because it always sounds so easy, that no one would really expect someone strategic behind someone who creates a cash balance report, which is not our job actually, but sometimes the perception is that it is, right? So
yeah. That's some good points there. I think that there's a sort of a catchphrase out there in terms of Treasury being a strategic partner to the business. And I think that's what you're alluding to there, is the way that Treasury can kind of help the business and act as that expert on cash management, banking, a lot of these different topics. We've seen it in as simple as ways, a payroll department, needs to process payroll files. So they need to get those files to the bank. But if they're using old methods to do that, maybe they're sending them to the bank and they have no idea whether the file got there, whether it was successful, whether there were errors in the file, until the back office at the bank calls them at 8 p.m. on their personal cell phone or something, the night before the file is going to settle. And, they'll go to Treasury and they'll say, hey, is there a better way to do this? And Treasury can say, oh yeah, so if we move you guys to, XML based files, you'll get real-time confirmations back that the file's been accepted, that there's no issues with the file, and that'll actually make your life better. So ways that they can partner with the business that way. We've also seen some good examples too, in terms of companies who really have a great forecasting process in place. When they do their variance analysis and they notice, hey, cash receipts were off by 10 million this week, a lot of companies would end the analysis right there and just say it was cash receipts. That's what caused the variance in our cash flow forecast. But others, who have more insight into the working capital aspect of it, will look into that and say, where were they off? Okay, it looks like this particular business line, the DSO crept up by 4 days over the course of the last 2 weeks. So we're collecting cash at a slower rate than we thought that we were. And they can even dig further into that and say, okay, we can actually sort of, isolate it to these 6 customers that are paying us consistently late. And then they can go back to the AR department and say, hey, we have a problem with these 6 customers paying past terms. Could you guys, have a conversation with them and see if we can get, sort of more timely payments back for them? And then they're partnering with the AR department as well to help them in their collections process. And they're actually improving working capital and improving cash flow within the business by sort of drawing those lines together. So yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways out there that Treasury is doing that, sort of being that strategic business partner within the organization. And Michael, I know we don't want to not give you the chance to sort of opine on this one as well. If you had anything to sort of add to this point here before we move on to the sort of our next discussion point.
Yeah, there is maybe one point but that's a bit going to the let's say the heart of the Treasury team also. That's, let's say, the topic, John, what you also mentioned when derived from the forecasting part, being the let's say a bit of lighthouse function in terms of handling internally the risk management, taking over that piece, really evolving then or moving over to the capital allocation, the financial contracts and so on. And that is what we have seen also in the project, that is more a strategic part, because knowing how to handle risk, that's a part that's originating from the payment stream and all the things, making that really let's say error prone. But the part is definitely in that case what we see in the FX, the interest and the commodity risk management and all to name some parts of it, really that Treasury is also there being more and more really, let's say, a touch point where other departments would reach out and say, okay, well, could you tell us a bit how you're driving that one? And it's also the part is when you look at the CFO perspective, definitely saying, okay, well, we have the liquidity planning, we have the other parts, so the forecasting and so on also the risk management. So you have it combined in one central team. So I think that's the part is from a dashboard logic, you can, let's say, address more topics to the Treasury team and get the answer right away in that case.
That makes sense. Yeah, for sure. So yeah, maybe getting back to this topic in terms of like what's influencing Treasury to make this transition from operational to strategic. We talked about some of the factors, but one thing I'm always curious about is, it's been an interesting, say, 3 to 4 years, right? And so are some of the political and economic events of this period sort of influencing that shift in some way? So you have obviously the pandemic, which was a major event in terms of how people, even work fundamentally, right? It sort of changed that picture quite a bit. You have the Ukraine conflict, you have supply chain disruptions that have persisted for some organizations for multiple years at this point. You have inflation, you now have rising borrowing costs. And Michael, maybe I'll go back to you for the first word on this one as well. Do you think these factors are in some way sort of influencing that shift from operational to strategic for Treasury departments out there?
I definitely think so. That is what we have seen over the last years. On also recently, let's say, looking at the most recent parts, when we look at the Ukrainian part there, it's a part when you look at basic things like sanction screening, being in line with the regulation which is out there. So that was really put a lot of things to test, saying, okay, well, are the processes robust? Is, let's say, the ERP handling that one? No, we have seen a lot of treasury teams which were then put to the front row and say, okay, well, you should take care of it. And that was a fortunate part when we look a bit at statistics, that it was really a part that the treasury management systems they had in place, they were able to really handle that one and really fulfill that rapid change in business needs to be compliant with the regulation. That's one part there. The other part is definitely going back to the pandemic. You mentioned that one. Yes, definitely the part on how they work together, the collaboration there is definitely a part which really more or less screams a bit for a digitalization, a technology driven part, because from, let's say, within a short time frame you had fragmented teams, but they needed to work together to still ensure that the processes are kept in line, that the first signature is applied, the second signature is applied, and you didn't have the people around the table anymore. So that was really a part saying, okay, well, can we get things in a more automated way moved over to a technology so that you're able to really focus on how do we deal with uncertainty? How do we deal with things arising? Because what we learned is a part, and I like that quote, at some part, a hope is not a strategy or a plan, because that was a bit the part really there where we had a lot of discussion saying, okay, well, we hope that everything goes back to normal at a certain part. But definitely in that case, it wasn't so fast in that case. So definitely the pandemic, I definitely see as a driver or as an enabler, to call it really that way, for a technology shift and being able to take a more strategic role. And there is another part, definitely looking at things coming up from an economic perspective. Definitely the uncertainty is increasing, and definitely we often discuss, okay, well, can we plan for a year ahead? No, it's totally uncertain. Yes, but exactly then you need to do that. That's the part, you need to deal with the uncertainty to get at least a grade in it. And that's not about data collection. That's really, you need to rely on systems, on technology to collect the data and really free up the minds of the people, say, okay, well, we need to run through scenario analysis really to be able to deal with the different things coming up. So definitely, I think the outcome of the last 3, 4, 5 years is definitely a part that it enabled a lot of things, saying, get things automated, what can be meaningful automated, but focus on really to deal with the changes, the impacts on the business foreseen or really unpredictable, so that you're prepared for a most uncertain future at a certain point.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. So it goes back to the point from the beginning there about being strategic means helping the business to look ahead and plan for things and see things that are coming around the corner that they might not otherwise see. So it's definitely, I think, clearly facilitated that transition to a more strategic role. In particular, the pandemic, I can always go back to cash receipts because it's an easy thing, everybody understands it. But during the pandemic, I think nearly every business saw a slowdown or some sort of unpredictability in their cash inflows. There was just this whole cycle of, hey, we're not getting paid on time, so we're not going to pay our suppliers on time. And it was like a snowballing effect. And then really the only good way to get visibility into what was coming in for cash on a day-to-day basis or on a week-to-week basis was to actually go and have those conversations with the AR department and see what they're hearing from customers and things like that, right? So it helped to, I think, sort of accelerate that building of those internal relationships and that sort of strategic partnership that the Treasury now has in most cases with those internal departments. So I think that's been really interesting. I also think the expectations around Treasury increased a lot during that period because the CFO was looking for more frequent reporting. Hey, tell me on a week-over-week basis who's not paying us or what cash looks like, how far we're off from the normal projection. And it seems like that's another thing that persisted, is that it's the CFO just had this expectation of more frequent, better reporting from Treasury, walking away from the pandemic. So And then a lot of the other variables are, we mentioned before, to be strategic, you need opportunities to be strategic. Well, there are a lot of opportunities to be strategic out there right now. I mean, even look in the last week with what happened to Silicon Valley Bank, right? There's now another factor for Treasury to kind of consider within the last few weeks in terms of analyzing their banking relationships and things like that too. So all of this stuff is definitely having, in my opinion, definitely having an impact on the shift from operational to strategic. So. Yeah, and then maybe, another point here in terms of if you were sort of look internally at your Treasury department and try to benchmark where you are in comparison to your peers in terms of making this sort of transition from operational to strategic, what would be a good way to do that? Or I don't know, have you guys sort of employed any sort of strategies in your engagements to help customers, clients understand sort of where they stand in that journey, and maybe also like how to ultimately build a roadmap to progress from operational to strategic? And Katia, maybe I can go to you for a first point.
You mentioned something very important in your question already. I mean, it's about understanding the current situation, right? So a very easy way to start for everybody is networking with your peers, right? Go to trade conferences, look at presentations, success stories around topics that you think are of interest for you. Try to sort of benchmark yourself. But yeah, coming back to our topic perhaps a bit more is when you're not strategic, when you're not perceived as being a strategic player by the CFO, you won't get a budget to do that, right? So that has improved definitely, but even that is actually an advantage the pandemic brought. There are more online formats, there are more cost-free formats that you can look at to get to know the industry a bit better. But I think at some point in time, the outside help is inevitable, right? You need to have someone help you look at things, because especially when you're with a company for some time, you might have, without knowing it, adopted to it's always been that way, we've always been doing it that way type of mindset, which is, it's not a typical Treasury mindset, to be honest, but it happens to everybody, right? And sometimes it's also, yeah, you might have some blind spots because you never considered some things, or the considerations weren't relevant for your setup. The business might have developed further into something, into different areas, so that you need to adopt also in Treasury. And I think it's very important to understand your status quo. Yeah. So what we do, or what we call it, is more like a status quo analysis or health check of the department, which helps you understand what is your status and what is actually already very good, and what is actually not so good or a bit underdeveloped compared to peers. Did you have any blind spots that you weren't looking at all, or that there was no need, like, I don't know, interest rate risk hedging? We haven't been doing that for years because it was just not important to us, or it was not critical, right? And now it's getting more importance, and we need to tackle that problem. And many people, when they look at the status quo, also forget is that they can also look at their existing Treasury technology landscape. They actually need to, because the setup that they have is already quite good, but they're not using it to its full extent, because I said it in the very beginning, like the tech providers, they have immensely developed within the last years, right? So you might have a system in place that you're not using to its full extent because you missed out on some releases, or you didn't implement certain functionalities back in the time because they weren't relevant. But the functionality is there, and you just need to, it would be a quick win just to add that on top of your stuff. So yeah, understanding where you're at and why you're there is actually a very good point to identify, are there any quick fixes and what should become a strategic initiative? And then you can compile that into like a Treasury roadmap, strategic roadmap. So you have like a plan for a certain period of time. And then I think the discussion starts again with the CFO. We mentioned him a lot of times today because you of course need some budget there as well. Yeah, not only for the networking part, but also for like the roadmap then, or the implementation of the roadmap.
Yeah, no, I'd agree too. I like the sort of the idea of taking, stepping back and taking that 20,000-foot view of sort of what's going on a day-to-day from a Treasury perspective, because we all know Treasury departments are small teams, 2 to 3 people. It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day, and even some things that might be viewed as an outsider as inefficient, some sort of internal workaround that you've put in place with your processes probably is really manageable from a day-to-day basis for the team. They just get used to it. It's the way the process is, and they're able to sort of manage within that, but they don't necessarily see how that's impacting outside factors or how they could, sort of act more strategically or deliver information more timely or be a better partner within the business or whatever it might be. So I definitely like the idea of a health check, so to speak, right? Almost like an independent health check in terms of, and it's also tough to know where you stand in comparison to your peers. There's a lot of companies that we talk to that have this sudden epiphany, hey, we're way behind in tech investment, and you can almost sense that panicky moment when that realization occurs, and suddenly they want to catch up quickly, but they haven't really thought about how to frame that tech investment and what they really want to achieve from it. And so that's a tough thing. So doing that on a more frequent basis probably helps a lot with that, not being surprised that you're sort of maybe behind where you should be from a tech adoption standpoint or just a treasury process standpoint in general. So
it can be actually very motivating for customers, to hear that there are pieces where they're actually already very good, and that puts more focus on the things where they actually have a blind spot, and they think, oh, I never thought about that. Yeah, but then okay, if I'm good there, then let's focus on the other stuff, right?
Yeah.
That is definitely a part in terms of encouraging the treasury teams, and that's what we quite often see and say, even if you're maybe behind in one part, the part is really look at the overall picture, and let's say don't hesitate to talk to other or to your peer group in that case, because that collaboration is, I think it's really helping them. We had it several times, but what we think is really a part, definitely that's what we also encourage in our projects when we take such a maturity check, when we do that assessment, saying, hey, well, where are we on a level in terms of on the journey. But the part is definitely get it in the interaction with your peers and learn their journey, because that is John, what you mentioned is a part. It's let's say don't fear climbing the mountain. It takes several steps, and that's a part where I definitely would like to add here. It is a part. Don't forget the human factor. Don't plan everything in one package ahead. So let's say know your roadmap, know your vision, know your target, but then really put in the columns you would like to realize, and don't overload the team, because what you said is you're looking at 2-3 people running the treasury business. Well, there's a part called daily business. At a certain point they need to do that, but they need to deal with the ongoing improvements, and so that's a bit the part what we definitely encourage in that case. Talk to the peers, learn from them, look at the best practice, leading practice. You don't need to be number one to really get the best out of for your business. I think that's a message I definitely would like to leave. But you can build a leading practice in treasury. The question is, does it help your business? Does it really ease your life in a daily business? And sometimes the answer is no. So to really go for the best fit in that case. And therefore, such an assessment is definitely helping to know the starting point and know the target point at a certain step.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah. I think, Katya, to the point you made before, I think that treasurers are interested in this. They like technology investment. They'd like to know what these process improvements are. You saw that a lot, I think, in 2022 as in-person events started to open back up and reach full capacity. Those are the conversations that were going on, is, people stopping by providers' booths or talking to each other and say, hey, what are you guys doing? What's changed in the last 2 to 3 years? Or does anybody have sort of an interesting new process in place? So kind of level setting and understanding where you are in comparison to your peers is, and there's a ton of value in that for sure. So we are reaching the end of our session here. I always like to end with something that's a little bit more of a direct, I guess, call to action type, question. So, maybe if we were to think about 2023, it's going to be certainly a very tight year for budgets, a lot of economic uncertainty out there, right? So if we had to give some advice in terms of, what would be a specific area to focus on to drive the most strategic value within your organization, within treasury, this year, what do you guys think would be maybe one or two? And I know this is a tough one because every business is different, every business is in a different spot, but maybe some real general advice in terms of some of the real high priority areas that you see for 2023, maybe even taking into consideration some of these economic factors that we talked about in some of the previous points here. So Michael, maybe I'll go to you for the first words on this one.
Yeah, I think the part is definitely it's the question where you start from. But in that case, definitely what I would encourage in that part, knowing that every budget needs to be justified and building the solid business case for that one. But I think still that assessment allowing you really to analyze really, and that can doesn't need, let's say, a huge part. Simply get an information, where are you on your journey, and let's say really revisit a bit what do you think might be your blind spots, weak spots, whatever, and what is it really compared to a market standard in that case. So that's an assessment where I think that budget should be justifiable and is really well spent, because it could give you really the first steps to have such a treasury roadmap ahead and say, okay, well, what should I tackle the next 2-3 years? The other part is definitely a bit, if you look at more on a topic specific piece, definitely take a look at definitely a solid foundation of the cash management payment part, because that is ever the foundation to look in the forecasting. And that is an interesting piece, what we have seen, why we think the whole forecasting piece, combining with AI technology and all the parts, is really a thing which is currently developing. If you look at the last 10 years with the crisis, you ever had the mode, oh, we need the liquidity in the crisis, the liquidity forecasting, and then it was, okay, well, we survived that, fine, and then put it back in the drawer. That's an interesting thing, what we have seen these days, what changed. Saying, okay, well, now we made it through it, maybe now let us start the liquidity forecasting in a proper way, really get our cash management sorted, clean up the banking space at a certain point, have it a bit more reliable, and really get the hundreds of formats out and focus on a specific part, have that as a foundation, and look at the part on the liquidity forecasting. Risk management and all the topics you named it, John. If the business is driving that one, has everything else, it can be that one. But let's say taking these two anchor points, let's say look at the status quo and where you can evolve, and the other part, really take a look at the cash management payment part with the spin to the forecasting. I think these two parts definitely should be justifiable, even in times where it's harder to really get the budget agreed for some topics.
Probably stressing again something that Michael said in the very beginning. When getting back to you at this question, the strategic roadmap, I think it's really an important foundation to plan out the projects, because it will most likely not be one project, but like a project portfolio that you need to manage, and you need to budget, and you need to plan the resources, and you need to distribute the budget and the resources among the projects in a sensible way, and then in a sustainable way, basically. So it's important to have that overview. So the investment in the foundations is definitely helpful. Getting the foundations right. Michael, we spoke about it yesterday. We have a young generation of treasurers who haven't seen interest rate risk in the last 10 years. They have no experience in that field. They will need to tackle this soon, now actually. But of course, you need to get the basics right. You need to get the foundations right. All your, also FX rates, your FX hedging can only be as good as your exposure planning or exposure identification, right? So getting a good plan and a roadmap to manage all the initiatives as one point, and then start like really not with the 10th step, but starting like step by step to climb the mountain to stay in your picture, is really helpful to try cash management, visibility improvements, wherever you're at in your organization, and then you can build up on all the other risk related issues. And risk, I mean, it's our job. We're perceived as the cash managers we have been perceived as cash managers for a long time, but we are risk managers, in fact.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't thought about that point about, this being the first time a lot of treasurers are exposed to this interest rate risk type topic, right? Being in the favorable rate environment that we had been in for so long. So that's a good point. Definitely area to focus on for 2023. And I'd agree with both you guys in terms of cash management sort of being fundamental, particularly in the rising rate environment. People, and I think also when you're trying to make the business case, everybody understands cash flow, everybody understands borrowing costs. It's an easy way to be able to show how you're going to add value in this particular environment. And cash management is changing so much. It seems like there's so many good tools out there to help treasurers more effectively manage cash. It used to be, hey, look out, we're going to have a liquidity shortfall 2 weeks from now. Let's draw on the revolver, to fill that liquidity gap. But you can do that in a lot more real time now, where you're looking and saying, okay, we have a liquidity shortfall. Is it going to last a few weeks, or is it going to last a few days? And then based on that, what's my strategy going to be? Are we going to adapt the payable schedule? Or if you've brought in a supply chain finance program, you have the ability to tap into maybe lower rate, so-called debt or short-term funding through pulling in early pay discounts, or offering early pay discounts to pull in receivables earlier, or you could draw on a line. But there's a lot of different ways you could do it, and you can really structure that in a way that you can efficiently manage borrowing costs and maximize the value of your cash. So I say that'd be definitely a nice area to focus on in 2023 environment. So yeah, with that brings us to the end of the discussion. Thanks very much, guys, again for joining. I thought this was a really interesting conversation. We certainly covered a lot of ground on this topic, and hopefully gave the listeners some good sort of real insights into what's happening out there in the market and in your particular client engagement. So I appreciate that. We do have just under, it looks like 10 minutes left in our session here, so we're happy to answer some questions from the group if any questions came in during the course of the session. Michael, Katia, I just want to thank you again. Really enjoyed the conversation. Thanks for joining the Coffee Talk. And
thanks
to the
audience,
we'll see you again on one of our sessions. So hope everybody has
thanks
a good
again for having us.
Yeah, you're very welcome.